Hi there, in this video and the ones that follow I want to show you a couple problems that you might have if you use a program like Excel in order to maintain it as a database versus using a true database system, relational database system like Access. So this is based off a little scenario I was working on in class the other day, and I've got a flat file database being a database with just one table. And let's just assume I've got some employees here. I've got 4 employees, I've got their hourly pay rates, and I've got their email addresses. And whether it's 4 employees or 40 or 400 or 4,000 doesn't really matter. Now, so far this is not so bad, and if this is all the kind of information I would need, Excel would be a fantastic program for keeping track of this. But I would start to run into some problems when I want to keep track of some different kinds of data. For instance, let's assume that my employees are assigned on different contract jobs throughout the day, weeks, months, and whatever. For instance, Carla here, she goes on different contract jobs. It could be network admin or something like that, or DB admin, even better. And I would like to keep track of the various jobs she goes on, and I would like to know, of course, where the job was and how many hours were spent, so that way we can keep track of billable hours. Now, if I'm going to stick with the flat file single table method, then I have to keep track of the various jobs in here somewhere. And I could do something like I could insert some new columns, for instance. And one of these columns could be job description. And then I could do job hours. Even better, I might have job start time and end time to keep track of that kind of stuff. But I'll start off with just job description and job hours. And if Carla goes on 3 different jobs, then I'm going to have to account for that with more information about Carla. For instance, we'll have Ralph Co., Sam Co., and Chris Co. Alright, so these 3 companies, and maybe she spent 5 hours at one, 6 hours at another, 7 hours at another. And of course her pay rate was the same for all 3 of these jobs. Well, and let me go ahead and duplicate her email address too. So as you can see, as we start to keep track of an employee's individual jobs, by the way, I don't have date in here either. Date would certainly be a realistic thing to have. Once we start keeping track of individual jobs, we start to get a lot of redundancy. The employee's name is repeated over and over again. Their pay rate is repeated over and over again, and their email address is repeated over and over again. So if later on down the roads, if Carla's email address changes and she's got 300 jobs scattered throughout here over the past couple of years, then you have to make sure you do a global change and change all of these. So it becomes a very inefficient way to keep track of data once you're using a single table, hence the 2-table system. Now I'm going to keep using Excel here for my explanation. So let me break this down using another table, okay, to keep track of jobs. For instance, one table will keep track of just the employees, another table will keep track of the jobs. And I'm going to go ahead and create some new column names here. I'll have job name, and I'll put in job date and job hours. Okay, and of course, I need to know who worked on the job, so let me go ahead and just take these, and I'll go ahead and put in employee name. Okay, so now if I want to keep track of Carla working 3 different jobs, I can just put in Carla 3 times, and I can bring these down here. Job dates, I'll just make up some dates here. How about 10/1/09, another 10/1/09, and 10/2/09. Job hours 5, 6, and 7. Okay, now that I've got this information in here, I can actually take some data out of this first table. I can take some columns out of this first table. And now I'm back to a slightly simpler system. So now I have 2 tables of data. Let me go and bold these to emphasize them. So I've got employee names, employee pay, an employee email just for my employees table. I keep track of information just about the employee up here in this first table, and now I keep track of just information about the jobs down here. And now it's a little bit more realistic, and there's a lot less redundancy. So now I can kind of keep track of everybody. And let me go ahead and plug in a little bit more fake data, and then it'll just kind of emphasize this fact. Okay, there we go. I just added Brent with a couple of jobs at different places on some different dates. Okay, so using Excel or any kind of worksheet or spreadsheet application in order to keep track of multiple tables becomes a lot more complicated. I'm not saying Excel experts couldn't do a really good workaround, but it's just not what it was designed to do, and this is where Access comes into play. So once you start to need multiple tables to keep track of data, you're going to want to shift over to a database application. I've got this information up here about my employees, and I've got this information about the various jobs. Actually kind of would prefer a job name to be to the left of employee name, but it's not too critical. We also need some way to uniquely identify each of the employees and to uniquely identify each of the jobs. For instance, there's a chance that we could have a couple jobs with the same employee name or even the same job name. So we need some kind of an ID number. Practically every table you make in a database is going to have an ID number of some sort. Your driver's license number, your social security number, your student ID number. These are all unique ID numbers in somebody's database. So a realistic thing we might have in here is we might have another column of information, and I could have something like employee ID, and then I could also have job ID. And once I do something like this, I can of course assign every employee an ID. I can do A, B, C, and D, and for job IDs I can have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And now when I refer when I refer to a particular employee for a particular job, instead of using their name, I can actually use their ID. So Carla is C, so I can change this to C and Brent's to B. So I've actually reduced a little bit of my data, and that's okay because pretty soon these tables are going to be related to each other. So if I need to find out how many jobs Carla did, I simply have my database look for all jobs with employee ID. Let me change this over to employee ID so it makes more sense, to employee ID C, and of course we can find out that's Carla and what her pay rate was, and I can take pay rate, multiply it by the various hours, add them all up, and find out what her billable hours are going to be. So this way, when you're making multiple tables, it makes them much easier to link together. So often tables that are going to be related will have some field in common. Now, sometimes the field names will match up exactly, but they don't need to, okay? But the data does need to match up. Notice over here, employee ID, it's a unique field. It's called a primary key. For instance, no two employees will have the same employee ID. No two rows in my employee table will be exactly identical because of this employee ID. But employee ID down here can actually be duplicated. So employee ID is not the primary key for the jobs table. Job ID is the primary key for the job table. When you're relating two tables together, it's generally going to be from a table's primary key to the other table's foreign key, which is basically the field that's connected to the primary key in another table. This relationship here is called a one-to-many relationship. One, because employee ID is unique, only occurs one time within the table, and many over here because clearly I can have several C employees and several B employees and so forth. So it's a one-to-many relationship.